Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Resilient Riches. We have a guest of the ages today, Debbie Kiekderer, who is the coach of the century, and not just coach on basketball, not coach on any of these sports, but she's actually coaching some of the largest brands in the world. And she takes a lot of her coaching ability and actually does a lot of mentorship. She's a huge presence in entrepreneur organization in New York and really across the globe, has spent so much of her time and so much of her free time giving back to the communities. And she always felt that people were giving to her. She's built 5 companies. I'm sorry. She's a published author. She had a radio show for 6 months. She's got some unbelievable insights about how somebody should live their life, how somebody should build their lives, and how to look and perspective on the way that you view money, the way you view success, and really how to build riches amongst every aspect of your life. So we're so honored to be here. On a side note, Debbie is my mentor. So I'm really excited. I'm actually a little nervous today. I don't normally get nervous, as my dad can tell, but we're really excited. So Debbie, if you can give us a 2-minute background about you, and then we'd love to, I have 150 questions for you, but I'll get to 5 of them.
Sure. So I have lived somewhat of an untraditional life, I would say. I was someone who thought that from the time I was 14 years old, I said that I was going to be a business person and I was going to just make money. Never really thought about how or why. I just thought that's what I was going to do. And so went to put myself through college. And then once I graduated, actually got into work for Estee Lauder and was part of their creative team for 13 years and thought that I would stay a corporate executive for a long time. And then I had a couple of children and I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to stay a corporate executive anymore because really I can't plan my own life. They're going to plan it for me. When I turned in my mid-30s, I decided that I was going to start my own business and really decided to do that when I had 3 children and a husband at home and said, I'm going to take this great job that I have. I became a consultant for 3 years and then decided to become an entrepreneur. And I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go out and build this big business. I was like, I'm going to go do my own thing while I have my kids, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do after that. And so for a really long time, I didn't even know if I was going to stay an entrepreneur. But since then, I've had 5 businesses. I've written a book with a co-author. And I've just done so many things because the trajectory was, kind of what's next.
It's really amazing because we find a lot of people that will work for these huge companies, and then they say, I want to go off on their own because they feel that same thing. They want to be free. They want to wake up every day and do what they want to do. And they, many times in these corporations, that person is incredibly smart, but they're hindered by the corporate environment, by the structure, by the compliance, by the legal, whatever it is. And it's very hard for them to change the mentality. I mean, we had a new associate, a new salesperson for us, and he was working in a hospital. It was very hard for him to change from a point of working in this institution where everything's set up for you. And he calls me up. He goes, okay, what do I do about health insurance? We're like, health insurance? Like, I don't know. You're running your own business. Like, you got to set. He goes, what do I do about taxes? Yeah, you're a 1099 employee.
It's even
now.
more than that. I mean, I've been through a couple of my own businesses, made that change. It's the golden handcuffs that I think is the biggest problem because you're working there. It's a good job. It's fine. You're happy, and you're making good money and you're paying the bills and you have kids at home and you've got expenses. So how is it that you're able to sacrifice that and go into something unknown that you don't know what's going to happen? You don't know how you're going to be able to pay the bills. I think that's the biggest issue. And that's what takes real courage.
It does, but I don't even know I didn't think I was courageous. I was just like, I have to do this. It was kind of this driven thing. And I think that's what happens to people. Like it's courage.
You must do it.
But you just have to do it. And I think the thing that I was seeing is in corporate America, I couldn't really take the vision I had and implement it because I had so many people I had to get approvals for. Oh. And so I was like, if I keep going down this road, it's not going to happen for me anymore. So I need to figure out another way to do it. The funniest thing though, is when I started my business, I was head of operations for the clinic creative department. And so I was really running an operation. It was a $25 million business at the time, P&L. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go out and do this business. But my number 2 person said to me, you're head of sales too. And I was like, no, I don't do sales. What do you mean I'm the sales? She's like, yeah, you have to do sales. I'm like, no, I don't do that. Like, what do you mean? So when you start a business, you realize you do everything, right? There was me and one other person. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? But you just do it. And one thing I would say that I really do feel is when I started my business, I had 15 years under my belt. And so going out, I had a lot of contacts. When you're a young business person, you don't have those contacts. So that becomes much harder. And many young businesses, young people doing business, it's much harder to get that traction. But I had at that point, I could just call people and say, hey, I'm doing my own thing now. What do you think? And they'd be like, oh, come in and talk to me. And so my sales was very organic because I knew a lot of people.
It's a very funny thing, actually. I don't know yet. You don't really know this, but I moved from Toronto to New York when I was in the jewelry business, sort of with my father-in-law. I was working for a company, decided to go on my own, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm calling the same customers and I'm calling the same suppliers in India, Bangkok, because it was jewelry, it was loose stones. And so I have all the contacts set up. So now I just want to transition it. It's not like I'm starting something new, but I'm transitioning it now. I'm going to give you a better deal. It's going to be fine. This could be the same service because I know what you need. So it makes it a much easier transition just to walk right into it.
Yeah.
It's hard for entrepreneurs to have those contacts and to understand that when you're working in corporations to actually build relationships, because it's really not your job. If your life is going to be sitting around and just following up the trajectory of the next 30 years, then you don't need to build relationships really. But if you want to push yourselves to the next stages of life, and this isn't something, did you always feel that you were going to leave Estee Lauder and do something on your own? Did you always have that entrepreneurial bug?
No, I thought I was going to be there for a long time. I actually had an amazing career there. They were an amazing company. I did so many things with them. I was promoted. I just had a wonderful, wonderful career there. It really was more about me and my family and what I could give to them. And so my husband was not well. And so I knew that I was going to be the person that was going to do more then. And so I was like, I have to figure this out. That was the courageous part, though, where I knew that I couldn't rely on someone else to actually help me get there. And so I think when I think about going forward, I think that's why I call it accidental. But I think there's a lot of accidental entrepreneurs. I think people don't necessarily say at 15 years old, I'm going to be a business owner, and maybe more today than when I was younger. But I think for the most part, we decided because we say we can't fit into the box.
And that's what I'm just thinking about as you're talking. I mean, that was something that I found. My own father was a CPA in Toronto. He also, when he was working for other companies, I can't deal with the big corporation bureaucracy. I just don't have the patience for it.
Yeah.
I just can't deal with it. So, I work for a couple of large companies also. I'm not going to go through my whole list because you will stop me.
He tells us in real time. The story takes about 30 years.
I did a lot of different things, and it doesn't let me.
Cuts it down.
It doesn't let me talk about either Toronto or the weather. So we're going to cut out those conversations.
Which you already
right now.
Immediately got to you. That's why we did some prep before this to warm things up. It's really to cool my dad down with which vaccine.
You're lucky you're not from Toronto. And I could have spoken about other guys about hocky, but we didn't do that either. But so we don't. My father also, he worked for a controller for the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. He's so frustrated, just can't take the bureaucracy and the idiocy sometimes that just you face. So you could do it so much better and do so much more as fulfilling.
So here's one thing though that I would say that I really took away from that company is I had two amazing mentors from there. And that is actually why I think I did so well after I left, because they truly, and I think with mentorship, I think you see something in someone that they may not see in themselves, and you bring that out in them. And my two mentors there were people that really supported who I was going to become. And it's almost like they could see it before me. And now as a mentor, I do the same. I can see in people things that they can't see.
They don't have the confidence because they don't have the experience yet. They don't see what you're seeing from the outside. It's more subjective. That's what I think.
I also think, though, it's the gifts they don't see. So we grow up thinking this is how we are. This is the person we're supposed to be. This is what we're supposed to do. And someone comes in from the other side and says, wait, what about this? You and I have had this conversation.
Absolutely.
And so, it's not about what is there in front of you, but what could possibly be.
That's the exciting part.
Yeah. So I think from a coaching mentorship point of view, it's really about somebody being able to look at you and say, what else? And even in the coaching I've done within the corporations that I've worked with, I look at the person I'm working with and say, yeah, you can take this trajectory, but like, what if we thought about over here? What if we did a little bit of this? And really teaching how to learn how to work with people in different ways to bring out the best in them.
Yeah, one of the mentorship that you gave me really right at the beginning is to start a second business and to build something and something that allows you to travel and something that allows you to do more than just currently doing financial services. So we do the podcast and we do all these other different types of ventures that we really enjoy, and it gives you a refresh on life, because when you really master your trade, it gets boring and you become complacent in what you're doing. But when you have something on the side, you see things at a different angle into it, and you realize, oh, there's actually a lot more I can do, and I can become a lot better in my current trade. So I feel since we started coaching, which was like probably a year and a half ago, that I've gotten a lot better in my main occupation, in my restaurant, to my mafia, that I can do better for clients. I can connect better. I can connect easier because now I have different outlooks. And if I need to take a break from financial services, I come and do the podcast. And I've had some incredible conversations with some people that I go, what the hell are you talking to me for? Which is the same feeling I have in my financial services. When you were transitioning from working in we call it bank mentality, because that's really what it is. When you were transitioning from bank mentality and you were like, okay, well, I'm going to go into contacts. Did you invest a lot of capital in yourself or in a business? Because that's really what people say. Oh, I can go off with the bit. I can go off and do my own thing. I just need an idea and a lot of money. How do you answer to those people who are trying to leave that current stage, and what the first stages to get out of that is?
So there's a few things. One is, if you're building a business around the business you've been in before, not a brand new business, you should really be thinking about, can I work with my existing client? Can I leave and work with my existing client? Because I immediately have income coming in, revenue, right? And if you can't do that, then you really do need to think about, okay, so if I'm not going to do that, how do I manage that? So as you're building your business, you need to really start to think about who it is that I'm going to really connect with in those warm relationships to start the business. I also took out a home equity loan in order for me to fund the business. So you absolutely need money. And a lot of that money went to the branding of the company, because I was going to be working with luxury businesses and I had to have a very strong brand in order for them to want to hire me. So I spent as much money as I would have had I been at a big company, because I knew that when I walked in the door, if I didn't have that presence, they were never going to hire me. And so, you also need to know the business you're in and what you need to do and how much money you actually need to raise, or how much money you need to get, or how much money you need to lend or get loaned, so that you are going to be successful. You have to have money. It's always, I was talking to somebody last night and they were like, I want to raise $750. I said, raise 1.5 to 2 million, because the $750 is going to go away too soon and you're going to have to raise again. And so it's really about understanding what you need in order for you to move forward.
I think people always underestimate how much they're going to need to start a business, and how fast things are going to happen, how quick your revenue is going to go. And, and I think also if a new entrepreneur doesn't have that confidence and really realizes what's coming down, it's a little bit like marriage, then they probably would never do it in the first place.
Yeah. And I think that there's a little bit of, like you said, like, oh, I have this great idea, I'm going to do this business. So it's like, okay, it's like a real business, right? So I think that part of the mentorship and coaching is understanding that those things really need to happen up front. I worked for the Canadian Technology Accelerator back in the day, and I was mentoring companies coming into the US, into New York. And when I was working with them, a lot of it was understanding, the difference between like a Toronto and a New York, and then also the difference between how to really present yourself here and the money that needs to be raised for that.
It's interesting also in that what I'm gathering from this is, yes, you need to understand how much money you need to raise. We're very cheap people. So we're like every time we have anything, everything's negotiable, which people don't understand.
We're not cheap. We're inexpensive.
We're expensive as
inexpensive.
If clients want to use us, we're expensive. But in general, we are very, very careful where we spend our dollars and where we allocate. So my dad always says, no, I'm the forever optimist. I always go like, Dad, we should do this. And he goes, no, how much is that going to be? It's like $8. It's like, no, we can't do it. It's too much. So he's a cheapskate, which works because his background was he was very loose with capital. He was very loose on spending. And that's where we got into the financial troubles. But now he went into the reverse, which is I'm more loose on spending. Mm-hmm. My wife is very not loose on spending. She's actually very tight, much tighter than I am. But my dad is very tight on capital. So we're very specific on where we put it. People go, I need $10 million. And then they spend it. And they're like, I didn't even really get anything for it. Which I love that you're saying is that you realized who your marketing is and who your customer is and where you actually need to deploy your capital.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
Yeah. And I also think, so I'm going to switch this a little bit. So when you're in the luxury business, you really need to spend money because you're in the luxury business, right? So that's you're in jewelry, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You're in that space. You cannot cheap out in that because then you're in trouble.
You have to make a solid presentation that's going to match with what you're trying to sell and the people you're talking to.
Right. And you have to match it too.
Exactly.
Right? So you have to be the person that actually does the same thing. So depending on the market that you're in, you really need to speak to that. I would always say like as for me, I'm a creative budgeter. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. I don't pay attention to the pennies because if I pay attention to the pennies, I'm not doing what's over here. And I think that's a big issue when people get into business and they're really worried about pennies and they're not worried about building a business over mm-hmm. here. They really lose sight of what they do. And then you're not going to have a business.
Well, some people say it's penny smart, pound foolish. So, you have to what Yair is saying. What?
Some people
Everybody says, but you have to know where to spend it and not to be, I don't know if going around to 4 different gas stations, like you were saying with your Tesla to find the cheapest gas is
more for research purposes.
Is the most efficient use of your time. But maybe that's like a hobby.
And what we're saying is that, I have this thing about you live in the scarcity or abundance mindset, right? So like based in a business, you're kind of in that same place. Like if you believe. And there's a lot of manifestation as well, right? So you're an optimist. You believe that things are going to go well. And a lot of times for people who believe that, they do go well. For people that are always worried that it's not going to be okay and that it's not going to happen and things like that, they kind of can spiral into overthinking too many things and then you don't move forward.
I definitely agree with that. I think it's definitely a mindset in what you see. But I also think, and that's why I have enjoyed the partnership with Yair since I started. And I wouldn't do this without him. I wouldn't do this without you. But I like that optimism. Because even when things go against you, you don't care. You don't pay attention. You don't get stuck in it.
Right.
You move on. You're easily move on. He's not big into sports, football, etc. But you throw an a quarterback in the NFL throws an interception. He's got to have a short memory.
Right.
That's the whole thing. And I think that's what I enjoy with Yair because he has a very short memory when things don't go the way we want. I have a longer memory.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why when we started working together, I was like, you cannot just sit in this business. It will not go well. The business won't do well either because you'll be too focused on it. They'll start to get angry at it almost. And you need to move into other things that actually mean something. It doesn't mean for everyone they have to start a new business, but it means that you have to kind of redirect your energy to a place where you're not over focused.
Yeah, it was also take your business that you're working 60 hours a week on and bring that down to 30 hours a week and then add 10 hours somewhere else.
Right.
So, and when you do that, and it's kind of also when you have kids, which I find we say in Hebrew, we say babies bring mazal, babies bring luck. And what it really means is that, okay, before you can work from 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. every single night. And we used to do that. We used to come home at midnight, 3-4 times a week because we'd be seeing clients.
Well, I'd be later than you because I'd have to drop you off in the city and then go after that.
It was horrible. But what we used to say is that if we didn't have a night meeting, we'd be wasting our meeting. And we'd go back to people 3-4 times and we're like, we don't even know if we're going to get this sale. We're going to close this deal. We would just keep going back. And just lean on them.
Crazy stories.
Yeah, some crazy
back and forth.
Yeah, just crazy stories. One guy, we found out one guy bought life insurance on his parrot. We're like, this guy's nuts. He made us buy sushi all the time and then didn't even do the deal with us.
Right. And that's, I would say too, like when I look at people to hire, I'm looking at people that have a lot to do. because the busier they are, the more efficient they become.
Correct.
For
It
sure.
brings you tighter.
It does.
After I had my kids, I was home at 5.
So everybody that I hire always has another passion, whether it's children, it's art, it's something else that they do, it's film, but they're working so that the work that they get done and the time frame they get done is done well, because they don't want to come back to it, and then they go on to what they need to do.
And I love what you're saying. So we started the company. So we just built this company. We realized how to leave, how to raise capital, where to invest it. We're starting to spend, we're starting to hire, and being really particular with who you hire. Your wealth is going to be directly correlated with the 5 people you spend the most time with. So you're doing that, and that's part of your business life, because that's really who you're going to spend most of your waking time with.
Yeah.
And then while you're building the company, what are the obstacles? What are the challenges to grow and to build? Like, what is the coaching that you're giving to entrepreneurs to build, and what's the eventual goal of the company?
So I think that is the question I asked. Like, where do you want to be? Like, what is it that you see? So today I was actually mentoring someone in the coaching, and I said, so what's the number that you want to land at? She said, what do you mean? And I said, well, at some point we have to put like some, goalpost in. Like, where do you want to go? Like, how much do you want to have? Say you're going to retire in 20 years. What does that look like for you? And she had no idea, and that's okay. But I said, next time you have to have an idea. Sit down with your husband, figure out what you're thinking. And then when you can get that number in your head, that number can totally change. But at this point, if you want that number to reach that number, then we work towards that number. So if we're going to get at $100 million, that's a different number than if we're at $10 million or at $5 million. And then, as a mom of 3 children, for 10 years, my business was at the same number because I was completely happy there. I had time with my kids. I had time with my business. I had time with my husband. I had time to do things. And then once my youngest child got into high school, I was like, okay, I'm going to do something else now.
And just to clarify, there's nothing wrong with keeping at that level.
Exactly.
You don't have to feel like, oh, I didn't grow by 10% last year, so I'm a failure. No.
Well, I think that's a misnomer in the U.S. I think we really have this whole hockey stick concept, right? Which is that you're supposed to just keep growing at 20% every year to be successful.
I like you putting in hockey. I'm happy for that.
But I got excited.
But what I would say is that I had a really this line, and I was
that's
happy
fine
with that line.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I think that I say to people, like, that line was my line because it wasn't about the revenue. It was about my time. It was about what I was doing. And it was about me having the right team in place to do that. And then once I decided that shifted, then my focus completely changed. And I was like, okay, now I can do this. And then so that's why that number matters, right? For me, that number was very small before that point.
And I think what's important to realize, and a very important point, is that that's up to you to decide. You can make whatever you want happen for yourself once you decide what it is that you want.
The beauty
you can do it.
The beauty of entrepreneurship. If you're working in a big company, you have to constantly grow. You have to constantly grow. If you do not grow, then typically you get fired. They lost their touch. They this, they that. But if you're working for yourself, you can create your own life. And that's part of creating your own life, that sometimes you don't want to push harder. You want to have a better time with your family. You want to, for me, I love spending time with my kids. That's just something I love doing. I'm not going to sacrifice that. So I set up time blocks. And in the morning, I want to bring my son to school sometimes. So I set up a time block every morning at 9 a.m. from 9 to 9:30. It's called family time. My dad sees it. He makes fun of me. He laughs at it probably every single morning.
I'd like just to cancel, delete it out, out of the schedule. It pops up
every day. So it's family
very
time.
Annoying.
So it's family time. So I used to start work at 8 o'clock and I was in the office. If I was in the office by 7:30, I was upset with myself. Now I get into the office at 9:30. I do my stuff at home. I wake up early, whatever. But you can create the life that you want to create. So we're building these companies. We're growing. You've done it obviously for yourself. You ramped up big time. How did you finish your first company? What did you do you did 5 companies. So what did you do with your first company? And then what pushed you? How'd you exit that company, or what did you exit? And then how did you get to a second company? Because let's say you made all the money in the world and you said, I don't need it anymore. How'd you get to that second stage?
My first company is still there. So it was the foundational base of all of my other companies. So it's the company that allowed me to do the other companies, and I just kept that company going. And like we kind of learn in EO, it's like I was not working always in the business. I was working on the business, right? So the work I was doing in these other companies actually filtered work to this company. Mm-hmm. And so the foundation of that company has always been here. It's 23 years old. It's been around for a long enough time, and it's always had a trajectory that has been about kind of this, I had a philosophy around it, and I kept that philosophy, and it pivoted because it's in technology. So technology is always changing. But that company I never exited. My second company was a company that was really based on writing my book.
But before you did that, sorry, let me just interrupt.
Yeah.
How did you leave? What did you do? What did you decide that it was time for me to exit, shift the mentality of the first company? That was kind of what I was
so as
inferring.
a salesperson, I think you're always thinking about like how else you can do sales.
See other opportunities.
Right? You see other opportunities. So when I had these opportunities present themselves, I was like, oh, wow, this could actually be a really nice.
Yeah, why can't I do that?
And so, and similar to you, and I think that's why we started working together, is that I felt like if I stayed in this, I would get like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I wanted to keep doing this, but I wanted other things to be able to fill in the blanks for that. And so my first and second and third and fourth all have something to do with what I do in my company now. But they were offshoots of it. And so they allowed me, I always call them, so two of them failed because the partnerships were not right. Right. And so I entered in with two partners and they were not right. I didn't lose a lot of money, but I called them my going back to grad school. I learned so much in those 4 years of doing those companies of what not to do. And also learned like how to get into the next one. My last company, I built a tech platform that's still alive. It's still here, but I've been building technology for all these other companies. And I was like, I need to build something for myself. And so I built out this company that allowed us to for me to do a lot of things in and around the retail space. And so that company actually is being revived this year and trying to figure out what we're going to do with it next. And my very first company was when I wrote a book, I co-authored a book called Beauty Pearls for Chemo Girls. And my co-author I had worked with when I was at Clinique, and she had survived breast cancer. And we decided we would do this book, and we took a journalistic approach to women undergoing chemotherapy. We sold 10,000 copies. We had a radio show. We did all these things around it. And was that we would talk about defining success? The success was not about making money there. It was about helping people. It was about getting a voice. It was about learning how to really be in the presence of people and really help them. So the way it worked for me is because of my first company, I had a lot of experts that could be in that book. And so that was my contribution to that.
All right. So I got to ask, I mean, you were working in cosmetics. Mm-hmm. And then you went to technology. Mm-hmm. How did you make that transition? Like, where did it happen?
So I've always had a love of technology. And so I was actually doing some technology when I was at Clinique, just building out like within our, and within the creative department, we brought in some of that. But it's always been a passion. This is what we talked about. Like you bring your passions into what you do. And so the company I have, we actually consult in the technology space and help to build out and consult on building out e-commerce sites.
But only in that industry? Is that how it worked? So you went wide.
Yeah,
you went wide.
But my first clients, of course, were beauty clients because that's what I knew. But then I got into broadcast and a lot of not-for-profit and have some pretty well-known names within our organization that we worked with. So.
Well, you knew how to market.
And I don't call it marketing. I think it's really relationship building. I think when you have a business, there's hunting and farming, right? My company was a farming company. I did not go out to hunt. I didn't make cold calls. I didn't have a VA get on the phone and be like, call 50,000 people over here. It was like, this person knew us. We did a good job. They made a referral to here. I did this thing called Power Partners, I don't know how many years ago. And she told us 5 people in your life give you almost all of your business. Now, not directly, but indirectly. And so when I go back to those 5 people, that's how I built my business.
Yeah, it's the same thing. We do this when we do sales training for other advisors and other firms, and they bring us in all the time. I write this little like stick figure man or woman or whatever you want to call them nowadays.
A person.
People, human. No, you can't say human.
Yes, you can.
Well, you can say furry. There's a furry thing. I heard people.
Don't go down that path.
Yeah, so, and then I do little bubbles around. And I say, okay, you have you as a person, you have your friends and family, you have your synagogue, you have your charities, you have your business connections, you have your mentors, you have all these people. Where do you get your business from? Because that's really where it's going to come from. And you can put people down in those bubbles and see how much you actually do from that. And you can really monetize, understand if and I'm not saying you do charity for a business, but if that's something that you enjoy doing charity and you enjoy doing business with your friends in your charity, that's something that you can get more involved in. You can see your revenue, you can see how good you are, how much more you can go into, and you can really monetize and really see where your life is on a daily basis.
Yeah, and so for my business, for ChalkDust Consulting is my main business, and basically I call it my fluffy work and my really cause oriented work, right? So I always had my fluffy work, which was the beauty space and but then I also had this really important work that I was doing, like Autism Speaks, and we worked in like a lot of cancer. We did just a lot of different things, meaningful things. And so what I used to say to my not-for-profits is, you get the benefit of us being in this big commercial space, and we're going to do the same for you in this not-for-profit space. And my fees were less. And I just really felt that give back was really important.
So I have a quick story. I don't know how long he'll let me go, but it's very similar to what you sort of went through. So I was working manager administration years and years and years ago in the carpet manufacturing. And there was a guy, I was in Toronto, there was a guy, a programmer in Georgia that had written the software for the company. So I got to know about software, and I ended up being partners with him on a new software that he developed, and went on my own from there. So it was a very kind of interesting kind of parallel.
Yeah, but that's
So short
kind of how
enough?
that happened.
I know. I thought you said that was a funny story.
I didn't say funny.
Oh,
Did I say funny? I said
it wasn't.
I don't think I said
in that
funny.
category.
I didn't say funny.
No, but
funny maybe comparably like it was.
But I think it's I absolutely agree. I think that when you find a passion and you think you love it and you can go out like this, when we did the book, so much of it was really about getting a message out to people. All right. So Mary Beth, the co-author, she said if she survived, she was going to write a book because she couldn't find all the information in one place. Right. And so that's what we did. We actually put all the information in one.
So she saw a need and went to fill it.
And I think for the other things that I've done, it's similar. It's like this gap that we see in somewhere, right, in an industry, and we say, how do we fill that? Unfortunately, many of the things that I've done have been too early. And so I'll come out with something and it's too early. And then I'll see it like 8 years later. I'm like, oh, we did that 8 years ago, but it wasn't ready. And so the market's
timing.
not
It's all timing.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't, like I said, I have no regrets about any of that. I really feel like I learned so much. And
you lived your own life.
Well, and entrepreneurship is about continuing to learn, right? And so that's really the point. I don't think any entrepreneur wants to sit back. That's not why we do it, right? I mean, I think when I was going to say something also about you on corporations, like, here's the big difference. As an entrepreneur, you can decide how much you're going to make and what you want to do, like I did, right? In an organization, they tell you what you're worth, right? So that's kind of how that works. So you're waiting for them to promote you. They're waiting for them to tell you. And for us, it's like I used to say years ago, oh, I need $5,000. I'm going to get a little project and do this little project over here for $5,000. And I would do that. I'd be like, okay, now we're going to do this. And so I could go and find these things to do that were not necessarily in the mainstream, but offside to say like, hey, I just want to get this done. And that's what entrepreneurship really is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's deciding what you have this big concept of manifesting, which is designing and showing, putting it down and having the dream become a reality. You make an attainable dream, something that you can actually reach, but it's also uncomfortable for you. And that's something I think is a big part of what you like to do.
Discomfort is great.
Yeah, discomfort's the key. I remember when I used to travel, I never stayed in the same hotel. I backpacked for 4.5 months in Europe and Asia, and I didn't stay in the same hotel more than 2 nights in a row because I would get comfortable.
Right.
So you constantly move in the same city even.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is a theme of the people that you would coach and the people you mentor all fit this one brand. And it's a similar brand to what we are, what our podcast is, what me and you share on, is this level of resilience that are able to constantly overcome obstacles. So you're coaching people, and there's a lot of people want to get coached. I say you're the Lori Greiner of coaching from Shark Tank. And I say it all the time. It's because your ability to identify the talent of people who can take it and push and overcome these obstacles. And that's kind of what you've done. You've focused on people who are going through cancer that are, when you survive cancer, and my mom survived cancer, you're resilient.
Yeah.
That's the type of brand that's just what's going to happen. And
grateful. And grateful, right?
Resilient
you have those
and grateful.
Two things. And I would say the other thing too is visualization is really important. When we work, I'm like, write it down. Like, I want to see what you, because once you write it down, once you create it on something else other than in your brain, it starts to become something real, right? When you just think and think and think and think, it doesn't actually form. But when you actually write it down, and so, just today I said, make 2 columns. go the pros and the pros and the cons, and what are we going to do? And at the end, you'll know exactly what you need to do. But if you keep it here, it just keeps going.
It's a very
around
clarifying activity.
It is. And so that's a big part of what I do is visualization, is making sure you can see what you also want to do.
Yeah, it's amazing actually that you're able to put that into practice for people. So you continue building these companies, you keep getting more, obviously more wealth, more success. And there was something that you told me that I think you should share with everybody is how you travel with your daughter, with your children. You have 3 daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How you travel with your daughters, how you make them create the plan.
Oh yeah.
We'll talk about it. So I will bring that at the end because that's an amazing thing. I love it. But so you're building these companies. When did you get to the point where the companies were built big enough and let's say you sold some, or you just went, you know what? I'm good. It's time for me I built this house and it's time for me to turn it on and start giving back and spending I know you spend significant amount of time mentoring people, and it's not that you're getting equity in their companies. You're not doing it for free, for money. You're just doing it to give. What was the turning point in your life that you did that?
So I met when I was really in my late 20s. My late husband, actually, we met with a lawyer and he looked at me and he said, I know you're working for a corporation now, but I think you're going to be an entrepreneur. And I just have one piece of advice for you. Never take a partner. Do it yourself and pay your number 2 a lot of money. And just make sure that your number 2 is compensated, and however many number 2s you have, right? So you could have a few, but make sure they're compensated highly so that they feel that they are in the business with you. And so that's what I did. And so I had a few number 2s, but a main number 2, and she was able to really build the business because she was in it with me, but we weren't partners, but we were partners. And so I think there's opportunities where you can have partnerships that are not necessarily about a written legal agreement, but a written maybe compensation agreement that makes the person feel like they are part of you in a different way.
So I was very good friends a long time ago with the founder of Sirius Satellite Radio. He's the one that started the concept. His name is David Margulies. And I was just trying to find my own business. And he said to me, and I asked him, should I take a partner? He says, never take a partner unless you absolutely have to. Like financially, you can't do it yourself, but never otherwise take a partner.
Yeah. And I would say the 2 businesses that I had partners with did not go well. And I didn't take that advice because I was kind of like, oh, well, really what it is. And luckily those businesses were very short lived. But I think overall, when you work on your business, you have an incredibly good team that actually sees your vision. And if they can't see your vision, your business will not continue. So you need visionaries within the company. They may not be yours because you're still the figurehead of the company, but they have the ability to know and understand what you and they want. And it should be they together. It shouldn't be you.
But I think it's important that vision, you have to be able to communicate your vision to them. That's the important part. They're not mind readers. They can't guess, but you as the leader have to impart that vision to them. So
I would
they know
say
what
your
it is.
vision. I would say the vision.
Whatever the vision of the company, whatever that means.
And so what's really interesting is next week I have a meeting with my team and I'm asking what what the vision of the company they see is, not what my vision is, but what's theirs. Because at some point you have to say, we are all a collective team, right? We are all working on this together. The reason there's so much attrition today is people are they're not aligned to the vision, right? They don't see where they're going to be in 10 years with the same place. So I think when you look at that and you really gather in people to say, what is it that you want? And for some of my team, they may be like, I don't want to do this anymore. That's okay. Because in essence, they're not going to give the energy that's required in order to move forward in different ways.
But that gives you then an opportunity to say, okay, you don't want to do this. Maybe there's something else that you can do under my umbrella.
Yeah.
So you're not losing them.
Right. But my executive coach always says, endings, you have to end something to begin something new. When we keep the door half open, it doesn't really allow us to move into the new thing, right? And so that's why for me, like having my main company, the door was always open, but it was flourishing with that door open, right? And when it's not flourishing and you're keeping that door open, what's the point of that? And sometimes we hold on to things just because there's such an emotional bond to them. But if we don't shut those doors, then we're not opening any other door.
100%.
So, some people, you're just afraid not, what's going to look like if I close that door completely, what it's going to look like. So you're afraid to make that next step.
Fear is our biggest enemy, right?
Yeah, it's creating this. We call it head trash. It's just there. It's taking up space in your head, and you can't move forward.
Exactly.
What would you say one of your defining moments in your life that allowed you to be this successful? I mean, you've done so much in such a short amount of time. You're like 34 now, 35 max. But what would be that defining moment in your life that really allowed you to constantly push and build this resilience that you then impart on others, and then you help build others? What would be that point?
I think when my husband was 35 or 36 years old, he died and was revived. And I had a 2 and a 3-year-old. And I remember thinking like, okay, if I'm going to go on with this life, I really have to figure out how to do this differently. And I think at that point, I was actually home. I was working 3 days a week, and I went back to work full time. Some other things happened at the same time, but there was this moment of saying, I'm going to push forward. And I made a decision that I was going to live every day in the present, because when that happened, and you said you went through cancer, when someone goes through cancer and you don't know if they're going to be there anymore, and suddenly they're still here, you're like, okay, every single day is a gift, right? So from the time I was like 30, I literally was living 32. I was living a life in the present, and that makes your life completely different. And so when my husband passed away, I was grateful that he had lived. I wasn't angry that he passed. I was grateful that I had so many more years than I ever thought I would have with him. And that changed the way I looked at life. And so every day I lived in the present.
And it's important. I think when something like that happens, it's easily to be overwhelmed and feel sorry for yourself. Why me? Why is God doing this to me? What did I do to deserve it? But it sounds like you've moved past that. And that's the key to it. You have to forget about feeling sorry for yourself and you have to accept this is my lot. This is what I've gotten, whether you're religious or not, and take life by its best and do the best.
And you would think that I would have just stayed in corporate America because that was safe, right? Like that was going to be my safest avenue. I was going to be in this place where I would just make good money and be in a good place. And I was like very successful there. And I would say that changing that and saying like, no, I'm going to own this life now because I want to have the ability to have time when I want time and to be able to do things when I want to do things. And, he was in and out of the hospital a lot. And so like I needed that time to do things. And so I think there was just this moment of feeling like, and I was going to move forward. I had 2 little girls. I needed to make sure. And I ended up having a 3rd child. And so like, just really moving into this space of feeling like I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it the best way I know how. And if you look back, I was like crazy. Like people would say like, what were you doing? But there was no other way.
Entrepreneurs are crazy. And you're certainly crazy. I fall to no exception. My wife says to me all the time, she goes, yeah, you're the craziest person I've ever met. I was like, yeah, we're married for like you just figuring this out.
She did grow up in greatness.
Yeah,
she didn't have a huge pool of people to compare you to.
That's fair. She didn't have the diversity, but yeah, I mean that craziness is, but it's really also taking risks. And I had one of those moments when I decided to join the army, and I said, you know what, in Israel, in a foreign land, and I said, you get there and you go, wow, I almost just got murdered today. Like I've had 3 cocked, like guns loaded, put to my head, and not even by like Palestinian terrorists, like people I knew. And you realize like you don't want to miss this life because it can be over in a second, and it fine tunes you. When you look at death in the eyes, you can really, and real death in the eyes, you can really see exactly what life is in that moment, and you can force yourself to live like that. I live like that. I feel I live in the present every single day, except for when my son wakes up at 4 and just kicks the crap out of me. But that hurts me. But what would you say and I love the defining moment that you saw. Because you're able to connect so deep with other people, you were able to connect with your husband and connect through his struggles, and that left an impact on you. It's not necessarily that you were going through it, but you were a partner with it, and it's really, really deep, and it's really I hope people understand that. I hope people realize what that really means.
So part of the reason that I co-wrote that book was because Bobby didn't have cancer, but we were young people that had illness, and nobody knows what to do with that when you're young. Mortality's fine when you're old. People are like, oh, but when you're young and sick, nobody knows what to do. They all run away. It's like, oh, we care
It's
about
too scary.
you. It's too scary. And so it looks like you're looking death in the face, or at least like the illness in the face. And so this book was about really sharing the story of the support person of the person sick, because the person sick is sick. So they're trying to stay alive, but you're trying to manage all the things around it. And then nobody's around you because they're too afraid to be around you. And so all of a sudden you're like alone trying to take care of this person and kids. And it becomes very overwhelming. And so I think that was why the book talks a lot about supporting people going through cancer that are in their 30s and 40s and 50s, because that is a time when you're not supposed to be in that space, right?
So my wife had thyroid cancer between my third and year, I think, right? So she was probably 30. And I remember my biggest support person was my mother. And I was actually out of town when we got the diagnosis, and my mother calls up and says, don't worry, the thyroid cancer is treatable.
Right.
It's very treatable, even though we had a neighbor, I don't know if you knew this, but a neighbor next door to us who also had thyroid cancer who passed away.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, Bobby's diagnosis, there was no diagnosis. They had no idea what was wrong with him. So there's nothing that was going to ever cure him, because they had no idea what he had. And so for us, every time we went into the hospital, it was like another new adventure to figure out what was going to happen next. And so there was just a lot of this sense of there, for me back then, there was fear, but there was a lot of anger too. I was like, I was young and had this, it was just really hard. But then once I got to that place where I was like, okay, this is not going to be the way I live, I'm going to shift on the side. It really made a difference. And I feel like we together made the illness not be anything prominent in our relationship. It just became on the sidelines. And only when he was sick did it kind of come back.
So it didn't define you.
No doubt.
What was your husband's name?
Bobby. Robert.
Do you have, we do like, what was his parents' name?
Pasquale. Actually, Ralph and Margaret.
Okay, very nice. So we'll do something in his honor.
Okay, thank you.
In his memory, that's still living on with all of your coaching, all your coaches. Two quick things. One is, if you take your 5 values that we've done together, what would you categorize them as, and why would you choose those 5 values? And the second is, I'd love to hear how you travel with your kids, because it's really cool.
Okay, so the 5 values, we've got to go back to remember what they were, because I don't have them in front of me now. So,
but off the top of your head.
So I would say, we did this with the integrity thing. I would say that, is leadership one of them?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say leadership is the biggest one. And I think for me, when I think about that value, it's really about leadership should be selfless, right? It's really not about ego. It's the opposite. It's about really leading people to see. That's why the mentorship coaching thing is so important, because it's really about being able to lead others into a place where they can really find their greatest joy and their greatest accomplishments. And so I feel like for me, that's, probably, I see an astrologer, and so like my chart right now is like, it's one way. If it had done the other way, I would have been a therapist. And so I really would have been helping people no matter what. So it's just how it works, right? And I think that is the strongest, that's where I feel like I shine. And I think one of the things I've had to really learn is that, entrepreneurs tend to have a lot of ego. It's like because you have to be so resilient to keep going when everything falls apart and you're trying to figure it out. But if we can take that ego and shift it into the ability to say like, hey, I'm in this for a reason. There's a reason I'm here. In the end, when I look back, I'm going to realize why I did this, how many people's lives I affected, how many things I did for others that were just done because of the leadership that you have.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Do you have any last
What about
coaching words?
how she travels with her
Yeah,
daughters?
tell us about that.
So
said that so many times. I got to know.
I'm sorry.
There's so I did this because this is like, so you go away with your kids and they're like, oh, do we have to do this? Oh, what are we doing? Why are we doing? So this is what I do. And I've been doing this for 10 years. I said, I will book the flights and the hotel. You book everything we do. And when we get there, we'll do whatever you want. You just book it. And then we're going to get a little budget. Like, here's what we have. This is what we can do. We have had the best vacations. Literally, I went to Hawaii in 2021. The first thing I did was I went skydiving.
Nice.
I didn't even know I was going skydiving until I was like, here's the
That's the best way. You don't know. It's the best way is not to know you're going.
My dad got kicked off the plane.
I didn't make it on the plane.
Yeah.
We went skydiving. I took my two youngest is in Israel. We went down and did skydiving. It was a bit of a weight issue. That's all. I don't want to say anymore.
I think
couple kilos.
The skydiving thing also, it just was like, okay, so, and I think when you do this with your children, it gives them accountability and responsibility, because now if it's really bad, it's like, see, this happens. This is not about.
I love that. I love that part of it. You have somebody to blame.
It's so good.
Because they all just are like, oh, why? And you're just like, no, but this is your job. And then when a reservation gets canceled, they have to fix the reservation. I mean, my children are older now, but like, even when they were younger, it was really more about them really understanding. And look, it works really well.
Yeah, no, it's great. And you also build a nice relationship with you learn your kids. You learn what they enjoy, and they're not following you. And that's the whole thing. It's leadership. But leadership is, and I love that the value that you chose was leadership. And it kind of encompasses everything about this conversation. Leadership is not just about doing and everybody follow. It's leadership is empowering the people to go together as a group. And that means that you're working collectively. I was listening to the Jeff Bezos podcast, and he was saying group think and group problem solving is one of the most enjoyable problem solving that you can find, that you're not just one person and creating something. You're doing it together, and you're fine tuning, and you're building, and you're developing. And it's really, really enjoyable. So Debbie, where can people find you? How can people buy your book? I'd never read your book, so I'd love to, even though I'll wear my pearls.
How many books you want to buy?
Yeah. So our book is actually out of print now, but it's on Amazon. It was actually 2014's Amazon Best Picks. When we were actually did really well then. You might be able to get it as a PDF on there. I'm not sure as a Kindle version, but I can give you a book myself personally.
I'll take it.
And so where you can find me. So my the company name is ChalkDustConsulting.com. Or ChalkDust Consulting, and what else do you want me to give? Email address?
Whatever you want.
Yeah. So
LinkedIn. How about LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn. You can look me up under Debbie Kiekderer. So I do want to say one last thing. Can I say one last thing?
Okay, three last things.
So I think when we talk about resilience, which is where we started from, so my husband passed away in 2020, a month before the pandemic. And I really sat in deep grief for a long time, but I had a really good marriage, and now I'm in a new relationship and I'm very happy. And I think when you look forward in things, what we have to look for is the positives. It's the growth. It's not sitting back in what was. It's about learning, and anything in business and life, just saying like, oh, I had this. Yes, you did, but so I think if I wanted to leave one word here, it's about vision. It's about looking forward. And somebody said this to me recently. You may have said it to me, but I don't know. The windshield is much bigger than the rearview mirror.
Wasn't me.
Okay.
I hate driving.
Okay. Oh, I love driving. So if you're looking out the window,
very bad passenger. He's a horrible passenger.
I'm a horrible. But if you look at the window, and there's so much greater space than there is in a rearview mirror, but we tend to a lot of us look backwards instead of forwards. So if I were to leave us with anything today, it's about vision and visioning forward.
It's I've been talking about vision a lot since actually October 7th. And it's that we, the people around the world, cannot afford to look back right now, because if you look back, what will happen is you'll morph into yourself. You get depressed and you get stuck. So you have to constantly move forward and constantly do. Over time, then you have the luxury of looking back. So for Holocaust survivors was a great example, and Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs said this perfectly. He said Holocaust survivors did not recount what happened to them in the Holocaust when they got out. They recounted 20 years later. Mm. That was the minimum, basically the minimum and almost the under average of when they start to recount what happened. That's why you see a lot of Holocaust survivors talking in the 70s and 80s, and that's when they started recording, because they for the ones that want to move forward, they couldn't relive the past. And it's a beautiful thing that you're talking about is that living forward and pushing forward and constantly growing and setting your vision is what you do and really what defines you. And I think bringing people with you and just everything being accomplished has really changed who you are. It's changed who I am. It's changed who my dad is because I mentor him when I get mentored. So we really appreciate you coming. We love you. We care about you. May your husband's soul have an aliyah, a raising to the highest levels of heaven, because may he carry your family and your future with you. And bring you forward. And we really appreciate all that you do. I mean, it's amazing when you find true givers in this world. And I'd put you right there at top 2. I don't know the other second person, but you're in the top 2.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.